On a cold day at sea in June 2018, Mallory Harrigan and her boyfriend Cliff Russell were fishing for crabs about 4 miles off the coast of Labrador in Williams Harbor, Canada, when they spotted something strange floating on an isolated iceberg. At first they assumed it was just a baby seal, but the reality was far more shocking than they could have imagined. As their boat drew closer, they realized that the animal shivering helplessly on the ice was actually an Arctic fox which had gotten stranded in the middle of the ocean. Harrigan and Russell needed to act fast as hungry seagulls began to circle. The couple were able to maneuver their boat close enough to the iceberg to try and coax the fox on board, but it wasn't easy. The mushroom-shaped ice floe was so precariously balanced that it seemed like it wasn't long until it would collapse completely. Eventually, the pair decided to use the boat to break the ice, and then they used a dip net to bring him on board. The fox was so weak that it slept for the first 6 hours of their journey back to the harbor, but when he awoke, they were able to tempt him with some tasty Vienna sausages. When they reached land, the animal was able to rest and dry off in sawdust before Mallory and Cliff were certain that he was strong enough to be released back into the wild. The couple think the poor animal must have ventured onto the ice to look for food but got stranded when it broke apart and drifted away. Thankfully, these good-hearted people were around to save the day. Now let's take a look at some more amazing animal rescues by the best humans around. Caffeine kitties. In January 2020, Canadian oil worker Kendall DeWish was performing some routine checks on the oil wells in Dayton Valley and Edmonton when he spotted what he thought was a piece of trash left on a sheet of snow. When DeWish heard faint meow sounds as he approached, he realized that the situation was far more urgent than a case of careless littering. The furry bundle shivering in the snow was actually a trio of tiny kittens whose tails had been frozen to the ice. Unsure at first how to safely free the kittens, DeWish had a sudden light bulb moment and fetched a cup of leftover coffee from his truck. After using the hot liquid to melt the ice around their little tails, their kind-hearted savior took the kittens home and nurtured them back to health. DeWish posted about the incredible story on Facebook, and the trio found a new home together. They probably have a newfound taste for caffeine, too. All's well that ends well. This terrified pup was found in India in 2017 after falling into a deep well with no way out. She had already been swimming in circles for hours and was clinging desperately to the side after losing her strength. Thankfully, a passing villager finally spotted her and called Animal Aid Unlimited, who immediately rushed out to find her before she gave up hope entirely. As her rescuer was gradually lowered into the well, she mustered the energy to swim up to greet him and then allowed him to place her safely into a net. After being brought up to dry land, the pup was transported to the welfare center to be checked out and was then given plenty of time to rest and recuperate. Thanks to the dedicated rescuers at Animal Aid, this lucky dog was given a new lease on life. A quality rescue. The Australian bushfires of 2019 had a truly devastating impact on the country's wildlife. Around 25,000 native koalas burned to death during the horrific events, but one woman was a ray of hope for a furry critter nicknamed Ellenborough Lewis. The male koala was seen wandering around helplessly in the burning landscape before a local woman named Tony Doherty decided to take urgent action. Doherty removed her own shirt and dashed into the flames to scoop up the animal and get it to safety. Once they were out of harm's way, she then doused the crying koala in water and wrapped it in a blanket before taking it to Port Macquarie Koala Hospital to receive proper care and attention. Unfortunately, the hospital announced a few days later that Ellenborough Lewis was sadly euthanized after his carers realized that his burns weren't going to get better. This rescue may not have had a happy ending, but thanks to Tony Doherty, this koala escaped an even worse fate. Hunter with a heart. Everyone has their own opinions about deer hunting, but one group of hunters from Pennsylvania proved that the undeniable bond between man and animal can be truly touching. Jeff Seidel, Josh Davis, and Ed Schmalzel had been scouring the frosty landscape when they noticed an 8-point buck which was stranded out on a frozen lake unable to get up. The animal was skating around like Bambi on ice, and the men knew straight away that they needed to do something to help. Davis used a small fishing boat to distribute his weight evenly as he traveled across the dangerously thin ice towards the deer. Finally, he was able to slip a lasso around the buck and bring it close enough to the boat to calmly secure it. The deer was exhausted after the struggle and allowed Davis to bring it back to safety as the other men tugged the boat to shore. I'm sure this deer will watch his step from now on. Duck and dive. Sometimes even the smallest animals need a little helping hand from us humans. Back in 2009, a banker named Joel Armstrong, who worked at Sterling Savings in a second-floor office, noticed a nest of duck eggs located on a ledge of the building. Armstrong realized that when the mother duck's kids hatched, they'd face a dizzying drop to the pavement below, so he hatched his own plan to save them. When the morning finally came, Armstrong arrived at 5:45 a.m. and assumed the position. As the little ducklings lined up to make the jump, Armstrong ensured that he caught each one safely and placed it on the ground beside their mother, who was quacking encouragingly. Armstrong played baseball in college, so it's no surprise that he caught 8 of 12 ducklings. When the remaining 4 got cold feet, he climbed up and carried them down himself. His mission wasn't over yet, though, as Armstrong then escorted the family of ducks through the streets of Washington till they reached the canal. The ducks plopped safely into the water and swam off together without a scratch. We need more people like Joel Armstrong in the world. Stuck in the mud. When you're as puny as a kitten, there are plenty of obstacles in the great outdoors that could prove fatal if you're not careful. One stray cat got herself into a real sticky situation when she fell into a pool of deep mud near a village in Cambodia. Thankfully, workers at the nearby rice field heard her tiny cries and were able to spot her in time to call for backup. The thoughtful men used a large branch to hoist the drowning kitten out of the mud and carried her to a nearby pool of water. Although she wasn't very keen on getting wet, the men then washed the kitten in the pond to try and remove the thick layer of clay that was stuck to her fur. Eventually, her ginger coloring began to peek through, and although she was stunned by the whole ordeal, she started to look like herself again. After a meal of dried fish, she was right as rain, and nowadays she lives a happy life with her rescuers. Family reunion. Mothers always do their best to keep their babies safe, but some kids are just accident prone. In November 2017, a baby elephant in the jungles of Kerala, India ended up in a spot of bother after falling down a deep hole in the ground. No matter how hard it tried, the calf could not find a way to free itself from the narrow hole as its mother watched on hopelessly. Villagers began to gather as word of the distressed mother and her trapped baby began to spread, and finally rescuers arrived with a plan to free the calf. Using an excavator, they were able to dig away the dirt so that the little elephant could climb out of the hole and walk away to safety. As the onlookers watched the emotional reunion between the calf and its mother, something even more amazing happened. The mother elephant raised her trunk in a thank you salute to the rescuers. Sometimes we don't give animals enough credit for just how much they really understand. Pipe pup. In 2019, a father and son were riding along a road in India when they heard whimpers coming from under a bridge nearby. After going to investigate, they discovered something totally unexpected. There was a tiny puppy trapped in a piece of plastic piping. How he got there was a mystery, but they knew they had to help. The poor thing was totally jammed in the narrow tube, and no amount of squeezing seemed to be working. Trying a new tactic, the men decided to break away part of the pipe and then try again, but there was still no luck. In the end, they managed to free the pup by squeezing it back into the tube and then pulling it out from the other end. After taking the animal home to the family farm, the good-hearted rescuers cooked up a nutritious meal and nurtured it back to health. And it even befriended a family of chickens. Treetop terror. Bears and humans don't get to interact very often, but 2 Canadian bear cubs were in dire need of some help after they ended up getting stuck at the top of a 70-foot spruce tree in May 2019. The pair ended up in such a tricky predicament after their mother was sadly killed by a vehicle, and the spooked cubs ran up the tree in fear. Volunteers at the Northern Lights Wildlife Society from British Columbia were called in to help, but getting the cubs down from such dizzying heights was proving to be a real head-scratcher. That's where local hobby climber Stephen Bott came in. Bott successfully scaled the tree, which is the tallest in the entire forest, and was able to safely carry the cubs back down to the ground. The animals were sedated and given identification tags, and they will now be cared for at the wildlife shelter until they reach a year old and are able to be set free in the same area they were rescued from. Fish out of water. Tourists and locals enjoying a day out at the beach in the Brazilian town of Areal do Cabo got an unexpected surprise in March 2012 when dozens of short-beaked dolphins suddenly swam in with the surf. In no time, the pod became stranded in the shallow waters of the shore and started panicking instantly. Thankfully, everyone on the beach banded together to help their fellow mammals find their way home as beachgoers rushed to pull the dolphins back out to sea. Working like a well-oiled machine, this group of thoughtful humans were able to successfully get every dolphin safely back on track. But without them, who knows how many may have lost their lives. This kind of mass stranding is very rare, and oceanographers say there is no real reason why it happens. The dolphins may have been confused by vessels sounding their horns nearby, or the current might have washed them in as they hunted in shallow waters. Either way, this pod was extremely lucky that day. Sticky situation. In November 2019, Animal Aid India received a startling call about 4 tiny puppies in a very sticky situation. The pups had accidentally stumbled into tar that had been spilled in a local garbage pile, and within no time they were stuck solid. The terrified creatures were so covered in the stuff that they could barely breathe and could only really move their eyes, and it was going to be a lengthy process to free them completely. The tar was an inch thick, and volunteers spent 3 hours softening and removing it using oil and dish soap, pulling off huge chunks of garbage and debris in the process. Later that night, their 2 sisters were also found covered head to toe, and the volunteers got to work once more. After tireless hours of washing and scrubbing, the pups finally started to look like themselves again, and there was even better news. Their mother was found too. The whole family were reunited, and the litter soon picked up where they left off, playing and scrapping happily. Which of these heartwarming animal rescues made you smile the most? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.